Hello, and welcome to our show. Today's topic is Veterans Administration benefits. And today I have Carol Ponton and Matthew Hill, and they've written a book entitled The Road to VA Compensation Benefits, which is an analysis and an examination of veterans' benefits. Carol, Matthew, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's nice to be here.
Thank you for having us. And thank you for your service.
Thank you. I read your book last week, and as a veteran myself, I can tell you I found it very interesting. It gets right to the point, it's short, it's concise, and it gives the veteran everything that he needs quickly to get his benefits. What inspired you guys to write this book?
Well, we work with veterans all over the nation. We're attorneys who help them try to get disability compensation, and we see errors that are common no matter where in the country that the VA makes, and to the detriment of veterans. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to put this book out here. You know, we represent a lot of veterans, but we know we can't represent them all. And our hope is that through this book, veterans can learn more about their benefits and common pitfalls that they might come across.
Well, what type of veterans do you help?
Well, we represent a broad range of veterans. We represent, of course, veterans from these last two wars, but surprisingly, the majority of the veterans we represent are still Vietnam-era veterans who've been fighting for the last 40 years to get the benefits they deserve.
Well, what about all these young people who get called up as reserves for Iraq or Afghanistan? Are they treated differently from a full-time military personnel?
Absolutely not. They're entitled to the same benefits, and they deserve them. A lot of these reservists ended up spending a year or 2 years or 3 years over in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. And speak more to that, our traditional military force used to always be full-time active duty, but now the brunt of the duty has been taken by reservist National Guard. And so as long as they are on a deployment, active duty, a weekend training, if something happens, then they are covered.
Okay. Well, what does the veteran need to show to convince the VA that he is entitled to benefits?
Well, they need to show that something has happened in the service and that they still have a problem with that. For instance, say that a lot of these people had to do a lot of heavy work, and a lot of them hurt their back, and they need to be able to show that it really came from what happened in the service, and it's continued, and it hasn't. That nothing else caused it other than that injury in the service.
So the VA doesn't necessarily just accept a veteran's word for something. They are going to require some sort of an official record or some sort of proof.
Absolutely.
And those are the cases we see where it's not straightforward. They don't have a medical record saying back was hurt in service or the veteran developed degenerative disc disease. So it comes in the form of searching for other records, either personnel records showing the veteran had they had restrictions. Limited duty.
Mm-hmm. What about a statement from a fellow soldier? Would that work?
Those are very helpful, and we get those as well. But unfortunately, what happens is usually when people in the service, they're young, they feel great, they feel like whatever problem they have when they get out, they'll get over it. And so they don't tend to keep records. And then the VA says, okay, well, show me the treatment that you had 30 years ago. Those records aren't available anymore. Medical records are destroyed. So a lot of times a buddy statement is the key to winning your case. Someone who knew them during the service or right after the service.
So going back to what you had asked about what you have to show, and Carol had spoken to this, something happened in service, current disability, and then you have to have that link. It's called a nexus between the two. And that typically comes in the form of a doctor's statement. And so what Carol said is that if you don't have the medical records in service, a lot of times what we try to do with our veterans is develop lay statements, other soldiers that knew them in service, so that our doctor can say, well, based on what the veteran said and these other individuals said about his accident in service, then he can find a link between.
I had a client who had hurt his back very badly in the service, and one of the problem with the VA is they lose a lot of medical records. And therefore, he had no medical records in his file, no service medical records at all. So we were able to get statements from a number of people who remembered how injured he was when he came out of the service. That he used to play football, he used to play golf, all of those things, and he could not do them anymore. And all of the things they did as boys together, he no longer could do. And so we took those buddy statements and then gave them to a doctor to give us a nexus statement.
What about accidents that are not combat related? Would a veteran in that situation be entitled to any benefits?
Absolutely. As long as they're not doing something that they shouldn't be doing. If they're driving to base and they get in a very bad accident, that's covered, because you can't buy disability insurance when you're in the service. The only protection you have is through the government. So the government insures you for everything that happened while you were in the service.
The saying is that a service member's day never ends. So the veteran is on active duty 24/7. So the veteran who jumps out of a helicopter in combat and blows out his knee, and the veteran that goes on a skiing trip in the Alps in Germany for a weekend and blows out his knee, they're both entitled to the same benefits. You know, proving that the last one can prove what happened, but there's no distinction between the two.
Okay, so any injury that happens in service can be a basis for VA benefits, but what if the vet gets sick or develops an illness while he's in the service? Is he entitled to benefits as well?
Absolutely. My daughter was in the service and she was a medic, and one of her friends came in, and he was 21 years old and he had multiple sclerosis. And so he's going to be covered for that. He was in the service, he came in not feeling well, they diagnosed him with multiple sclerosis, he's being discharged, but he will be covered for that for the rest of his life.
If you've just joined our program, we're here with attorneys Matthew Hill and Carol Ponton, and we're discussing their new book entitled The Road to VA Compensation Benefits. So Carol, how does the VA go about figuring whether the illness is pre-existed the veteran service or occurred after the service began?
That's a great question. If they take you in the service, there's a presumption of soundness. That's why you have to go through the physical to see if you're sound and you can serve as an officer or as an enlisted man in the service.
We see that a lot with our clients where the VA gets that presumption wrong. We'll have, and this happens a lot with mental health cases where the VA will say, oh, you had a personality disorder, so that pre-existed service. And first of all, the diagnosis is wrong. And second of all, they didn't mark that on the exam and the induction exam. And the other thing, which is more subtle, is say a veteran had a knee injury before service, but it completely healed. And on the induction exam, there is a note that the veteran had a previous knee injury. Well, that doesn't count for a pre-existing injury, because if the veteran's completely healed, that doesn't matter. So if then later the veteran does hurt his knee in service, they can't go back and say this was a disease that happened or an injury that happened before service.
But I'd like to comment on what Matt said about the mental illnesses are the ones that we find the biggest problem with. If a person has a personality disorder, that's not one that you can be compensated for. So we find that the VA, the military, often would take people who are depressed, who had other mental illnesses, and say it was a personality disorder. Those are cases that we go back and we look at the symptoms, we have a doctor look at the symptoms, and often we're able to prove this wasn't a personality disorder. This was depression that resulted from what happened in the service, or PTSD from what happened in the service.
Okay, let me move on a little bit. Let's say that the veteran has established that his problem is service-connected. How does the VA calculate the benefits that he's entitled to?
We often tell veterans that have been in a battle for the VA just to concede that they have a disability that's related to service. Once the VA says, okay, it's service connected, that's the first battle won. But a lot of times they get a rating that is very low, and as I tell my veterans, you might have won that first battle, but don't lose the war. And ultimately, the war is getting the correct service-connected benefit compensation. So they have a rating system, which is very difficult to understand, but essentially it's you get rating increments from 0 all the way up to 100, and it's based on whether how much the veteran's disability prevents him from maintaining a job.
One of the things that I'd like to comment about Matt was saying is getting service connected, having the VA say, okay, we're going to be responsible for any problem from a stroke is the first step. And then they have to do a rating that's a percentage of disability they think your body has suffered. 10% up to 100. I had a veteran who had been trying to get benefits for a stroke. He had hypertension in the service for 20 years, and they had not given him anything. So finally, we got him awarded Service Connection, and they gave him 10%. So we went back, as Matt said, this is just the first battle. We went back, and we were ultimately able to give him 100% for 20 years, for the last 20 years, for what had happened. So I would tell the veterans, just because they give you 10% and you feel like you're entitled to a lot more, don't stop. This is just the first battle. You need to keep going, because you can get what you're entitled to.
Yeah, you know, I don't know too many vets myself that have got 100%. That's pretty rare.
Right.
Good job. You know, there have been a lot of stories lately about how some of the vets are homeless.
Yes.
Now, if a veteran, let's say he can't afford to go hire his own doctor, how would a veteran like that, in that situation, get his benefits?
I have a client who's a perfect example, and these are things that just tear at my heart. When people are living in homeless shelters and when they're calling you, you know, once a week because they don't have enough, they only have one quarter to call you with. And it happens a lot, especially people who have PTSD. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, is a horrible, horrible injury that so many veterans, starting as long as we've had wars, but I know with Vietnam veterans, a lot of them have that. And one of the problems is trust in being around other people, so these people find themselves homeless all the time. And there's supposed to be a special system with the VA that they will expedite these cases. They don't get expedited unless you have someone screaming on your behalf, I can tell you that. But what we do is we get their claims file and we figure out what we need to prove their case, and we front the money for that, for the doctors.
I'd like to widen our discussion a little bit. Can we talk about Agent Orange, Camp Lejeune toxic water, Gulf War syndrome? We hear a lot about these things in the press. Are these issues important to the vets?
Oh, they're very important to the vets. Agent Orange causes just a myriad of horrible, I mean, from cancers to diabetes to heart disease. And we see veterans from Vietnam particularly developing all of these. So they need to know what's covered under Agent Orange. A lot of things, and by the way, a lot of things, the government has come out and said we will cover any disease such as lung cancer, diabetes, heart disease, because if you were in Vietnam or you were exposed to Agent Orange. But we also see that there are other diseases people develop that they haven't decided that were connected to Agent Orange, but there's literature that they were connected. So it's a huge problem for these veterans.
Now, a moment ago, you used the word presumption. Explain to our audience how that plays into a veteran's case.
A veteran has to prove something happened in the service that's causing a problem they have now, and there's a medical connection. That's okay. The medical connection is something you have to get a doctor to verify, except in certain instances where the VA has said, we're going to waive that because we know that these were caused. So Agent Orange causes certain diseases, and the VA says, we're going to go ahead and accept. If you were in Vietnam, we accept you're exposed to Agent Orange, and if you get diabetes, you're covered. You don't have to prove anything other than how bad is it.
So if a vet falls into a situation where his illness is presumed, then is he still required to provide medical evidence of that? Or not?
Medical evidence to show how bad it is. And that's
I see. Okay.
Another area where we find that veterans really need more advice. If someone has diabetes, the VA is likely to give them 10 or 20% for diabetes. But diabetes causes a number of terrible problems. It can cause neuropathy, so they have no feeling in their legs or their hands. It can cause kidney disease, so their kidneys stop functioning very well. And they should be being compensated for these and other problems that are caused by diabetes. We don't find that the VA goes out of their way to do that. We find the VA may just, you want diabetes, here's your diabetes. If you want something else, you have to really hit me over the head asking for it.
So,
I'm
sorry,
I was just going to say the cases, again, we see where the VA makes errors are not the cases where the VA was boots on the ground in Vietnam and has diabetes. They're either, as Carol was referring to, cases where the disease is not one of their presumed, I think they've got about 15 diseases, or on the rating, where they err on the rating. Parkinson's was a disease that was just added to our list And I have a veteran who got service connected for Parkinson's all the way back to 2000, and the gentleman could not work. He was on Social Security disability because of the Parkinson's, and the VA awarded him 10%. And again, it's, winning the battle, losing the war. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars of the benefits that the VA would have kept had he not appealed. So it's just important to see the VA does a pretty good job of getting the presumption right. It's just, is the rating realistic compared to the extent of the disability?
So if a vet can show some incident in service and that incident is causing a current disability, he should get benefits, right?
Well, remember, you need the three things. Something happened in the service that's caused a present-day problem, and there's a medical connection, a doctor saying the injury in service has caused this back problem that he has now. So you need all three things unless you're operating on one of the presumption errors, okay? Like Agent Orange for veterans who were in Vietnam.
How compelling does a proof have to be? I mean, does it have to be absolute?
Oh, that's a great question. They have, if it's 50-50, it's not the typical order of proof that you find in most in criminal cases or civil cases. Civil cases, it has to be just tipping the scale in the benefit of the person who would win. In the VA, if it's equal, then the veteran wins, 50-50. It's as likely as not that what happened in the service caused this problem.
In some of the discussion here, it sounds like we have opposing sides. You have the veteran on this side and we have the VA on this side. Is the VA under any obligation to help the veteran, or are they supposed to be opposed to each other this way?
Legally, they're supposed to be helping the veteran. That's what I was saying. The law is so favorable to the veteran. Congress has passed innumerable laws that you read these laws and say, how can they not win? But the VA interprets them in a different way. So they have a duty to assist the veteran, but that duty to assist sometimes is not very helpful at all.
So,
I mean, I've heard veterans call it the duty to sabotage.
Yes.
And because a veteran will come in and say, here's my claim, here's my doctor showing that it's related to service, and here's my current disability. And the VA will come back and say, well, that's nice, that's quaint, let's go get our doctor to opine on it. And a lot of times their own doctor comes to the opposite conclusion, and unfortunately, the VA in those situations are more likely than not to go with their own doctor.
okay, so let's assume that the vet gets through all these hurdles and proves his case. What does he get?
Well, it depends on the degree of his disability. And they have, for a mental problem, you can have, I don't know why it runs this way, but for a mental problem, you can get 10, 30, 50, 70, or 100%. You can't get 20, 40, or 60, or 80, or 90. So they have different ratings that they will give you for whatever the specific problem is. Backs, they have a different series of ratings, 10, 20, 30, 40. So depending on what your disability is, it depends on that rating chart, and then they look at how they have examples of how bad the problem is for 10%, for a 30%, et cetera. And so, but that's the VA's take. I can tell you they never overrate. In other words, I never see them giving them more than they think they're entitled to. Usually they underrate, if anything. And that's another word to the veteran. If you feel that your problem is worse than what they're giving you, please appeal. So many times they get this advice, you don't want to mess with the government. Once they give you something, they may take it away. Right. And so what they do is they're told to wait a year and then apply again. Well, that means if they win, they're not going to get past due benefits like they would have if they had appealed. Most of the time, once a veteran is given a benefit, they don't take it away unless there was fraud or they were looking at the wrong records. It's not something they should be as worried about as they are.
I see, okay.
And to go along with that, I have a veteran recently that we won benefits for, where he had applied for compensation, so an original claim, and it took the VA 6 years to just decide the claim. Wow. And they granted him service connection for a bipolar disorder at 70%. And he was very excited. He got all these back due benefits, and he came to me and he said, "Well, I'm so excited about this, and let's close the file. I don't want to risk these benefits." And what I said to him is, I said, "Look, you've been on, again, Social Security disability since 2000, and your claim should have gone back that far. And he was very scared about appealing because he didn't want to lose his benefits. And I think one thing that the veterans don't understand a lot is that the VA can reduce your benefits at any time if they're not permanent and total. So after a while, he and I agreed to appeal. 2 years later, we got him 100% all the way back to 2000 at permanent and total. So not only did he get the bump up in compensation, and by the way, 70% is something like $1,300 a month, and 100% is $3,000. So there's a huge discrepancy there. But with the permanent total status, they couldn't touch his benefits anymore. So they're very skittish sometimes about appealing, and it's sad because not only do they typically deserve more benefits, but they're not gaining anything by not.
They don't realize that they could take them away anyway. It has nothing to do with what they have unless they get permanent and total. And that's one of the things that we really try to get for our veterans if they're 100% disabled, that permanent and total, because you ask what benefits they get. There's a schedule of how much money. 10% is like $123, okay? So 100% is almost $3,000. But if you get permanent and total, you get additional benefits in that your wife, if you're married, or your spouse is entitled to medical insurance. You are allowed a card that allows you to shop at the commissary, at the exchange. There are just a number. You get, in the state of Florida, you don't pay any property taxes. So there are a number of benefits you get when you get that 100% permanent and total in addition to the money. So when our veterans are entitled to that, we want to make sure that's what they get.
If you've just joined our program, we're here with attorneys Matthew Hill and Carol Ponton, and we're discussing their new book entitled The Road to VA Compensation Benefits. So Matthew, what about a veteran that has more than one disability, 2 or 3 disabilities? How does the VA calculate that benefit?
Well, so each disability is rated individually, but a lot of times we'll have vets saying, I don't understand if you add my disabilities together, I'd be 240%, yet they're paying me at 70. And so they have this rating code where it's strange in that it's not 10 plus 10 is 20. They combine the ratings is what they say. So they say if you're 20% disabled, that means you're 80% healthy. So the next 10% of that is not added. It's 10% of 80, which is 28. So the closer you get to 100, if you're 80% and you get a 20% rating, that's 20% of that remaining 20%, that's only 4. So the closer you get to 100, it gets awfully harder to get it.
Well, that's confusing.
It is very confusing.
I can certainly understand why one of our veterans might have some difficulty figuring that out. How common is it for a person to get 100%? As I mentioned, I don't know any vets of my friends who are at 100% disability. How rare is that?
It's hard to get what's called a scheduler 100%, meaning it's their ratings all combined, or they had one disability that equaled 100%. When we represent veterans and they're not working due to their disability, we typically try to get them what's called individual unemployability, which is what I call the back door to 100%, and that you don't have to have everything combined up to 100%. You have to show that you meet a 60% or 70% rating, and that disability prevents you from working. And if you prove that, then the VA will compensate you at 100% with the same benefits as any other scheduler 100%. And we see that's kind of the majority of the cases we see.
I want to go back a minute and get something clarified for myself. In these cases where the process is extended, like the example that you mentioned, 6 years, once the disability has been connected to the VA and they agree that they're going to give you the compensation, is that prorated back to the 6-year period when you first applied, or do you lose that 6 years and it starts today?
As long as you've been appealing, you can go back. Now, sometimes what the VA will do is say, oh, I'm going to give you the benefits, and they started last month. And those are ones that we appeal. But you are technically allowed to go all the way back to when you filed that appeal, that case, that claim that you've been working on, which is why we say, please don't drop your claim. Continue to appeal it. There are legal things that the VA has to do. Mm-hmm. And when they don't do those are the occasions when sometimes we can go back and we can reopen the veteran's claim from when he first applied in 1969 or whenever it was. Mm-hmm. And so when we get the claims file, that's the file that the VA has kept on this veteran since the first claim was filed. We go through it to look at how each claim was handled to see if we can reopen these earlier claims. And we have been successful in doing that. Now, that's not going to happen in every case, but it's happened in a number of cases.
Okay.
And those are cases, as you were saying, that you got decades and decades
Those
back.
are cases where we were able to get benefits back decades for this veteran. I have one now that's pending. They found him service-connected in 1967 at 0%. So I have great medical records, and I'm just waiting for the VA to get to that file.
So is this retroactivity, this applies to all veterans, or are there any veterans or veteran classes that are excluded from that?
Well, the rule is you can go back to the date of the claim you just opened. And what Carol's been speaking to are the exceptions. And that's why she said we look through their file. We're always trying to get it back to a previous claim because, Vietnam veterans in particular we've been representing for PTSD and other problems. You can see just this pattern through their lives where they applied. And our goal is try to reopen the earliest one possible because it's not as if they weren't suffering from it in the 80s, the 70s. And so those are the exceptions.
Mm-hmm. You know, we've covered a lot of information today, and it's been very helpful. Is everything that we've talked about today covered in the book here?
Well, we've added a bit. I mean, it's as Carol was saying, there's such a big body of law. The book is really just meant for someone who's trying to navigate the way through the system and understanding there's pitfalls and reasons or ways to get through those.
Because the body of law for VA is enormous.
Yes, I can imagine. Everything with the VA and the government tends to be large.
Right.
I'm sure we have a lot of veterans in our audience. Is there any advice that you would like to share with them while we're here?
I think that one of the things veterans don't do is they don't file the claim and they don't pursue it. So I'm not talking about filing one claim. The veteran knows what happened in the service, and they should file a claim for all of the problems they have. For instance, if they have diabetes because of Agent Orange, mention the kidney problem, mention the neuropathy in your feet or your hands, mention how your eyes, if they're affected. Make sure you put all of that on the record because the VA is not going to look for that. You have to put it right out for them.
Right.
And then if you're denied, continue to appeal. When we see claims, we will see some and we know they're never going to win this at the regional office. So the appeal goes, you file the regional office. If you're denied, you get to appeal to the regional office again in Florida, for instance, in St. Petersburg. And if you're denied again, you go to the Board of Veterans' Appeal in Washington. There are many claims that we know they're not going to approve at the regional office, but they will approve at the BVA. So don't give up. That's the other thing I would tell them.
This is so helpful. Carol, Matthew, I want to thank you for coming by today and sharing this very useful information about the Veterans Administration benefits. And if you want to continue the dialogue, go to their website and don't forget to pick up a copy of their book, The Road to VA Compensation and Benefits. We'll see you next time.